Yeah, good morning. It's great to be here. I wanted to spend just the first 30 seconds of my presentation considering innovation, because that's what we're here to talk about, isn't it? Innovation in relation to housing. And so it's defined as something new or different introduced, the act of innovating. And when I told a colleague of mine that I was coming to speak this morning, she said, who's attending? I said, housing providers, service providers, representatives of government, maybe some real estate agents, etc. And she said, well, that's an audience that can kind of create magic. And I thought, well, what a great challenge that is for us to try and create some magic today. And thinking about the wide breadth of skills and experience within the room today, that's what we want to try and find and tap into and think. And that's really what innovation demands. So I'm certainly not a magician. It kind of requires everyone to come together, but I hope over the next 10 minutes or so it can help facilitate some of that discussion and I suppose some provocative ideas about what might be possible around thinking about increasing supply in an innovative way. So I just want to give you a really quick snapshot of who SVA is for those who don't know, tell you a little bit about the work that we've done in the impact investing space and how that's mobilising capital to be deployed into a number of different kind of really challenging and tractable challenges that we face from a social perspective, and then I suppose put a few challenges out to the audience. So SVA, we're 12 years young, we're not-for-profit ourselves, and we've got about 50 staff scattered around the country. So we've done a fair bit of work in ACT as well over the last 4 or 5 years, helping lead the ACT Social Enterprise Hub, and so we've got a national footprint. So really, I suppose the way SVA does its work is those 3 blue circles are kind of really critical. We try to connect capital from everything from government, super funds, high net worth individuals, and deploy it into the social sector. We look to attract experienced talent, and so that's both internal within SVA, but actually work with talent within the sector to build their capacity. And all the work that we do really needs to be underpinned by an evidence base. So if the evidence base is not there, then we work to actually build up that evidence base and ensure that where we're allocating capital and resource is into programs, projects, etc., they're going to achieve the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve. Impact investing is one part of the work that Social Ventures does, and it's the part that I'm a director in. And this is kind of a nice clean slide to give you a flavour of what the impact investing market looks like. It's relatively in its infancy within Australia. There's been a bit more development over in the UK and the US, but it's really been born out of both the demand and the supply side. That is, on the demand side, we've got for-purpose organisations that are looking for a more diverse funding base. Historically, not-for-profits would largely seek their funding from government alone. We've also got the challenge around governments looking for diversified areas, sources of capital to actually be deployed and to achieve some of these social or address some of the social challenges they're facing on what is, across the country, fiscal challenges. And then on the supply side, and this might be a surprise to some, there's actually a large number of investors that are seeking to put their capital into action in the social space. It needs to fit their particular parameters and criteria in which they want to invest, but there's a large amount of capital that wants to be deployed into the sector. And so that's very much where the impact investing market sits, and that's really the role of SVA and others like SVA who are seeking to, I suppose, bring together those 2 ends of the spectrum. As I mentioned, as you look across that kind of spectrum, historically there's the philanthropic funding, grant funding, in which providers will receive capital, and yes, they'll need to deliver certain outcomes, but the money's out the door, and there's sort of no expectation there'll be a return on that money. And on the other side of the spectrum is the kind of commercial for-profit world in which investment is made and there's an expectation of return depending on whatever that vehicle might be. And again, sitting in the middle is the impact investing space. And so from an SVA perspective, we see that as playing a more flexible role. We're trying to bridge the gap between that of sort of grant and philanthropic funding on one end of the spectrum and the other end being kind of a pure for-profit, maximising profit end of the spectrum. And so it is a little bit disruptive, as that quote suggests. It's moving away from sort of 2 very traditional kind of structures and trying to create, I suppose, a bit of a middle ground. Just thinking about specifically what that looks like from a sort of a financial product perspective, again, there's very much, and as many of you will be familiar with, the sort of donation and government grant world or government contracting work. On the other end of the spectrum is your kind of your bad end of town, your private equity players, venture capital who are out there to kind of make as much money as possible, quite speculative, etc. But as you can appreciate, there's a lot of activity and potential in between. And so the social debt idea is that, and SVA has a small fund in which they're deploying capital in this space, is actually to be more flexible on their terms than what a traditional financier like a mainstream bank might be. And that can be anything from the terms of the loan, the underlying security that's required, etc. Much more flexible, and really a desire to get alongside our partners, organisations that we invest into, to actually support them and ensure that the capital we deploy is used for the purposes that's been agreed, but also to ensure that the social outcomes are being achieved. Then there's the kind of commercial debt, which is sort of, for any of us that have a mortgage, understand what that world looks like. And then this new kind of term, social impact bonds, that some of you might be familiar with or some may not be. It's a new kind of instrument that basically, in terms of its risk profile, sits in between kind of commercial debt and equity. And really the way it works is at a very simple level, it's a tripartite agreement between government, between a service provider, and between private investors. And essentially what it seeks to do is it identifies a challenging social problem that has a significant fiscal or financial burden on governments, that can be easily quantified, measured, and if a program is delivered that can make a material impact on those savings, then government, the savings from the delivery of that service, is that it goes back to repay investors. So basically investors stump up the capital up front to go into the service provider. The service provider delivers that service, and over a period of time, through kind of rigorous measurement, as the outcomes are being achieved, government saves money, and a portion of those savings are then channeled back into the investor. So the investor receives a return, the government gets both a social outcome and also savings from a budgetary perspective, and the service provider is happy because they've received capital and have been able to deliver their service. In terms of thinking about how much capital is available, it's kind of how long is a piece of string. But what we do know is that there's close to $2 billion of capital invested through our super funds largely. And as our CEO likes to talk about, if even 1% of those funds was deployed in the impact investing space, we'd see $20 billion injected into the space. Now, I certainly appreciate that that's a huge figure, and the requirements on tapping into some of that capital is difficult and onerous. But even on conversations that the impact investing team at SVA has had over the last number of months with both super funds, high net worth individuals, we see hundreds of millions of dollars in which organisations, fund managers are keen to deploy into the social space within the right kind of parameter and sort of structure that's being created. So a huge amount of opportunity. The market's large, there's a lot of capital. It's around being collaborative and innovative across all of us in the room to work through how do we actually set up products and vehicles that are appropriate to tap that money. So who are the investors? As I've mentioned, SVA has sort of engagement across all of these high net worth individuals. So that's everything from self-managed super funds to family trusts and private ancillary funds. So investors who are socially minded and who have lots of capital at their disposal. Large philanthropic foundations and trusts, corporate foundations, larger super funds and institutions. At varying degrees, but lots of these players are very keen to step into the impact investing space. Lots of them actually don't know how to, and I suppose that's where SVA and others who play in that intermediary space are trying to, I suppose, hold their hands and find product and opportunities in which to invest that capital. I just wanted to share this. This was a survey that we did after one of the social impact bonds that closed up in New South Wales. It was regarding restoring young children who are in out-of-home care back to their original families. I just thought it was an interesting insight into the mindset of the investor base. So there's about 60 investors who invested in that bond. We raised about just over $7 million, and it was heavily oversubscribed, which in layman's terms says that there was more demand, more people wanting to put their capital into the bond than what we could take on, which is a positive sign. But the two highest kind of measures for what drove the investment decision by our investor base was both the social impact, so the potential to impact on the lives of vulnerable children, and also the financial return. So it just really, I suppose, emphasises the importance of measuring those two kind of considerations, that investors are absolutely concerned about the social impact but equally the financial return is really critical. So we need to ensure that we're hitting the particular benchmarks required. So what do we know about collaboration and what have we done in this space? We've got a fund that's a combination of both Commonwealth grant funding and private investor capital. So we've raised $5 million of private investor money, and we're investing that into enterprises and community housing providers around the country, where we see a tangible social impact along with a financial return on that investment. We were also very heavily involved, along with BENSOC, Mission and Brotherhood of St Lawrence, to bring together a consortium to do what to date has been the largest impact investing deal in Australia, where we raised $165 million to actually buy what used to be the ABC Learning Centres and is now Good Start. And of that $165 million, about $40 million of that was what we call social notes, which was really social impact investors that were wanting to put their capital into this investment to see kind of material outcomes for young children who are in childcare. And so I suppose that gives us optimism and hope about where the next kind of large transaction is going to come from in the impact investing space. And as I mentioned, social benefit bonds, which the first one was a collaboration between SVA and United Care Burnside. BENSOC ran the other social bond, and across a number of the states around Australia and territories, there's a lot of interest around social impact bonds, recognising that they're only for a really specific part of the market, but there is huge opportunity there and investors are certainly kind of attracted to that model. And I suppose the question is, well, what next? What else? There's a lot of activity in the sort of direct fund investment space, social impact bonds, but what else can we put our heads together and find vehicles, structures in which investors are ready and comfortable to deploy their capital? So what are there's nothing new here, but the kind of obvious ingredients to these investment opportunities, particularly in this thinking about the sort of housing space for those with disabilities. Land and stock is vital, and because of the affordable challenges that Ilan spoke about, how do we actually find land and or stock on potentially concessional rates? And what is the role for government to play there, for community housing providers to play, even for real estate agents around sourcing that land and stock that's appropriate? We absolutely need private capital. Government are clear across the country that they're not going to stump up the full amount of capital required. So that's where we need to be innovative around our structures that we create to tap into a lot of that private capital that's keen to be deployed. We need innovative partners. And that's not just an SVA, that's SVA working with a large number of different players to actually bring this to life. And that's kind of almost each of you in the room have a really important role to play in that. And of course, government absolutely. There's challenges around, I suppose, market failure in this space, and because of some of the affordability challenges, that of course impacts on the sort of economics or viability of a particular project from a purely market perspective. So what's the government's role to kind of plug that gap and provide, I suppose, the support and the framework needed to, again, ensure that private investment's unlocked? Just really briefly, in closing, I just wanted to talk through two examples that SVA has been involved in recently in the housing space. There's a youth FOIA model, and these aren't, the youth FOIA model is not specific to people with disabilities, but what it does, I suppose, highlight is the innovation within this space and what's possible. We're looking at a development in New South Wales it's for young people at risk of homelessness. And it's going to be a 60 studio apartment build, but it's going to be a mix of young people at risk of homelessness with mainstream student accommodation. And so what that actually does by mixing the the tenancy mix, is that it actually starts to improve the economics and encourages more private capital into the development. And so what we're looking at is a $7 million upfront capital that's required, and close to 70% of that can be sourced from impact investing dollars. So all those investors I talked about before, we can use their capital to come in. There's just over a $2 million gap there that needs to be plugged either through the support of government, philanthropists, corporate, etc. And within this particular deal, the land is provided by the service provider, which again is largely a free kick. And the nature of some of these challenges is it needs to be a cobbled together package. We can't just go to market, buy at market rents, do a full development because the economics don't stack up and therefore you can't tap into that impact investing dollars. In Queensland, there's an elderly parent carers initiative that some of you might be familiar with an objective to provide sustainable living arrangements for adults with disabilities who are cared for by their elderly parents. And again, basically the deal was that it was a commercial development was being done, and the developer was comfortable with giving up one floor of, I think it was a 6-floor development, and those 8 dwellings were going to be disability friendly. And through a government grant of $1.6 million, it was going to be leveraged double that to ensure that the accommodation could be affordable and suitable for people with disabilities. So I suppose the question, and I know I've gone a little bit over time, so apologies, is really, well, what next? How do we actually kind of get our heads together and collaborate on some of these really big challenges? And as Alan mentioned, they are challenging when affordability issues are prevalent, when there's issues around discrimination and stigma, when there's really important kind of design considerations, which often actually increases the cost of capital builds. How do we kind of solve for this? And it really is a case of everyone coming together and thinking about community housing providers who are willing to leverage and potentially have land or stock that they can contribute, and progressive boards and managements that are able to see through, I suppose, some of the immediate challenges and think at a bigger picture. Service providers around input on design and location considerations. Absolutely a requirement for government to be a willing participant, and I think forums like this are a good reflection of that. But government to be thinking about what role do we play to plug, I suppose, that gap between sub-market and market returns. Real estate agents thinking through access to land and helping around some of those kind of the stigma challenges, and even developers thinking about low-cost construction models. So there's no easy solutions, but I suppose that's the kind of beauty of collaborating together, and that's where the need for kind of some magic is across the room. I recently saw Lion King, the musical, up in Sydney. Bit of a sucker for the old Disney production. And you'll know from this scene, Simba gets told, everything the light touches is ours. And not to get too philosophical, but we're kind of on the cusp, particularly in ACT, with NDIS rolling out and this incredible opportunity. And we look out upon the horizon and there's a whole amount of opportunity. And with all the heads in the room and the skills and experience, I think it's a great time to begin that journey, to get our heads together and start to work through how we can be innovative and collaborate to get really terrific outcomes. Thank you.